The phone on my desk buzzed twice before I picked it up, and Priya's voice came through tight and careful, the voice she uses when something at the front desk has gone sideways in a way she doesn't want to say out loud to the whole lobby. Claire, I need you to authorize a comp suite 412. The card on file declined twice, and the guest is, she paused. He's asking for you by name. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 39 years old, and for 6 years I have run the Ashford House, a boutique hotel wedged into a converted cotton exchange 2 blocks off the Battery, the kind of place where the floors creak on purpose and every employee learns to say of course before they've finished hearing the request. I built a life here out of exactly the kind of quiet, immovable competence that used to make my father laugh. What's the name? I said, already knowing, the way you know a storm has turned toward you before the sky has actually changed color. Walter Whitfield. 12 minutes earlier I had been standing in the stairwell reliving, for no reason at all, a sentence he said to me when I was 23, home for Christmas with my first real paycheck folded into an envelope I was too proud to hand him. You'll never amount to anything, Claire. Not really. Not without someone carrying you. He'd said it lightly, almost affectionately, the way he said most of the worst things, so that if you ever repeated them back to him he could say I never said that and mean it, because in his memory he hadn't. Now his name was sitting on my desk screen in the reservation system, checked into a suite he couldn't currently pay for, waiting to find out whether the daughter he'd written off would sign for it. I told Priya I'd handle it myself. I didn't grow up rich exactly, but I grew up around the performance of it, which in some households is worse. My father built 3 shopping centers and lost 2 of them, and somewhere between the winning and the losing he decided that confidence was the only currency that mattered, and that the rest of us existed to reflect it back at him. My mother, Eleanor, was the softer weather system in that house, warm where he was cold, patient where he demanded results, and when she died 6 years ago, quietly, of the cancer she'd hidden from all of us until hiding it was no longer possible, something in the family's architecture buckled that none of us fully understood yet. I didn't understand it either, not then. I understood grief. I understood my father sitting very straight at her funeral, dry-eyed, already fielding calls about a development deal 2 days later, and I told myself that was just how men of his generation carried loss, sideways, silently, through work. I didn't ask questions about the trust she'd left behind, the one meant to be split 3 ways between me, my brother Sam, and a scholarship fund in her name. My father was the executor. That felt correct to me. He was, after all, the one who amounted to something. There was a moment, early on, that didn't fit. I remember sitting at Harold Voss's office, he'd been my mother's attorney for 11 years, while he read through the trust amendment my father had brought in for a final signature confirmation, and Harold paused for just a second too long over the last page, his pen hovering, before he said, mildly, your mother usually signed formal documents with her middle name. Eleanor Grace. I remember thinking that was strange. I remember deciding it wasn't my business to think about it further, because I had just taken the assistant manager position at a hotel in Savannah and I did not have room, that year, for one more complicated thing involving my father. I filed it away in the part of my mind where inconvenient details go to become forgettable. That was the first thing I chose not to see clearly. It would not be the last. For a long time after that, life did what life does when you decide not to look at something, it kept moving, ordinarily, almost convincingly. I took the GM position at the Ashford 3 years ago. Sam started a small construction outfit outside of Mount Pleasant, and my father, ever generous with advice and mysteriously generous with capital he apparently no longer had, became his primary financial backer, a fact Sam mentioned to me over beers with the particular pride of a younger brother who has finally been chosen. My father remarried 2 years after my mother died, Renee, a woman 11 years younger than him with a laugh that filled a room and a habit of touching your arm when she talked to you, as if to make sure you were really there. I liked her more than I expected to. I resented liking her, a little, on my mother's behalf. None of it seemed connected. That was the design of it, I think now, not a conspiracy exactly, just a man arranging his life the way he arranged everything, so that no single person ever had the full picture, including, for a long time, himself. The first sign came from Sam, who mentioned once, almost as a joke, that Dad had asked to borrow against a certificate of deposit Sam didn't remember opening in his own name, part of some family trust structure Dad had set up for tax reasons. I laughed along with him at the time. I told myself our father had always been like this, a little opaque about money, a little theatrical about control, and none of it meant what it might have meant in someone else's father. I did ask, once, at a dinner, a small thing, whatever happened with Mom's trust, the scholarship piece? And I watched my father's hand pause over his wine glass for exactly one beat too long before he said, smooth as anything, handled years ago, sweetheart. You'd know if there was a problem. Renee changed the subject to Maya's school play. I let it go. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier to tell you I fought harder, asked louder, refused to be redirected. I didn't. I let it go because letting it go had always been the cost of peace in that family, and I had spent so many years being the daughter who didn't cause problems that I no longer knew how to be anyone else. If you've ever been the person who keeps the peace so well that everyone forgets peace was ever a choice you were making, you already know exactly how those years felt. The declined card in Suite 412 wasn't really the beginning. It was the moment the story finally had somewhere to stand. I went up myself instead of sending Priya. He opened the door in a hotel robe that wasn't his, sleeves rolled, a phone against his ear, and when he saw me his face did something I'd never once seen it do in 39 years, it flickered, just for a half second, uncertain, before the old smoothness slid back into place like a mask clicking into its hinges. Claire Bear, he said, ending the call without saying goodbye to whoever was on it. Small world. You're staying at my hotel, I said. I didn't know you ran this one. Last I heard you were in Savannah. He said it like an accusation, like I'd withheld the information deliberately, as though my career had been arranged specifically to inconvenience him someday. There's some mix-up with the card. Corporate account, should have gone through fine, my assistant probably transposed a number. I looked past him into the room, the minibar already opened, a leather folio of documents spread across the desk, Renee's reading glasses on the nightstand though Renee, apparently, wasn't there. Where's Renee? Charlotte. Visiting her sister. He said it too fast. I noticed that the way you notice a picture hanging slightly crooked, not alarming, just slightly wrong, the kind of detail your mind photographs without deciding to. I told him I'd sort out the billing. He thanked me the way you thank a stranger who's returned something you dropped, already turning back toward the desk and the documents and the version of himself that didn't need help from his daughter. I stood in the hallway afterward longer than I needed to, my heart doing something strange and fast in my chest, and I understood, standing there, that whatever this was, it had already started long before I walked into that room. I had just finally arrived to the part of the story where I was allowed to see it. The next 3 weeks were the kind that don't announce themselves as important until much later, when you're forced to lay them out in order and realize how much was moving beneath the ordinary surface of things. My father extended his stay twice, citing a real estate conference that, when I quietly checked, had ended 9 days earlier. He met a man named Grant Pierce for drinks in the lobby bar 3 separate evenings, and each time I passed close enough to catch fragments, bridge financing, second position, I can get you Sam's signature by Friday. My father's voice pitched slightly higher than his usual register, a register I'd only ever associated with him losing, though I'd almost never seen him lose. He asked the concierge, twice, whether the hotel's business center had a document scanner, and once I found him standing at it a little too long, feeding pages through slowly, glancing toward the lobby in trance every few seconds like a man checking whether a door was about to open on him. I called Sam. Not about any of it directly, I told myself I just wanted to check in, and somewhere in the conversation he mentioned, lightly, that Dad had asked him again about the CD, and that he'd been putting off signing something because it felt off but he didn't want to make a thing of it with Dad stressed about the market. I almost told him then. I had the sentence in my mouth of Sam, I think something's wrong, I think you should call a lawyer before you sign anything, and I swallowed it instead, because Sam sounded tired, and because I still, even then, wasn't sure enough to be the sister who blew up his relationship with our father over a feeling. He signed the guarantee 2 days later. I found that out afterward, and by then it was already too late to matter the way it might have mattered if I'd spoken when the sentence was still in my mouth. That is the choice I keep returning to when I tell this story to myself in the quiet hours. Not the discovery. The silence before it. He told me, much later, after everything, after there was nothing left to protect by saying it, what those weeks at the hotel had actually looked like from inside his own skin. I wasn't hiding from anyone. That's not how I thought about it. I was managing a temporary liquidity problem, the kind any developer faces, the kind I'd faced 4 times before and always solved. Grant needed to believe I was solvent long enough to close the bridge loan, and once that closed, everything else resolved itself. Sam's guarantee would never actually be called. The CD would be restored before anyone noticed it had moved. Renee would never need to know how close things had come. I told myself this every night in that room, and most nights I believed it. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to hold up a structure that had been mine to hold up for 40 years, and I did not know, yet, that the structure was already gone, that I was just standing in the shape of where it used to be. Claire walking into that room changed the math, though I didn't let myself think about it that way at the time. She was the one variable I hadn't built a contingency for. Back to where I was standing, that night, watching the lobby bar empty out and thinking about Sam's signature and how little time I actually had left. I found the original trust document by accident, or by the kind of accident that isn't really one. Harold Voss had retired to Beaufort 2 years earlier, and I drove out to see him on a Sunday, telling myself it was a social visit, a check-in on an old family friend, when really I had been carrying Harold's paused pen from that afternoon 8 years ago like a stone in my pocket the entire time. He remembered immediately. Attorneys who've been doing this 30 years develop long memories for the moments that felt wrong. He pulled a banker's box from a closet, his old firm's files, boxes he'd kept past when I probably should have, and inside, beneath insurance papers and an outdated will, was the original, unamended trust, my mother's actual signature, Eleanor Grace Whitfield, in the careful, slightly old-fashioned hand she used for anything formal, the same hand I'd watched sign hundreds of guest registries at family friends' weddings over the years, the same hand that would never, not once in her life, have signed a legal document with the casual, looping Eleanor Whitfield that appeared on the amendment my father had filed 3 months after her death, an amendment that cut my share in the scholarship fund nearly in half, and routed the difference into an account with my father's name on it. I sat in Harold's kitchen with both documents side by side and felt something in my chest that wasn't shock exactly. It was recognition. It was the particular, sickening click of a shape finally resolving after years of staring at scattered pieces and calling the confusion normal. I want to stop here for a second, because I think some of you already know this feeling, the one where the truth doesn't arrive like an explosion, it arrives like a key finally turning in a lock you'd stopped trying. Quiet. Almost anticlimactic. And underneath the quiet, everything. I didn't tell Sam that night. I didn't call my father. I photographed both documents, thanked Harold, and drove home with the knowledge sitting in me like a swallowed stone, and I told myself I was being careful, strategic, patient, and some of that was true. But some of it, if I'm honest, was the same old reflex, the daughter who doesn't make scenes, gathering ammunition she wasn't yet sure she had the nerve to use. If you've ever found the one piece of proof you'd spent years half looking for and half avoiding, stay with me, because knowing something and being ready to say it out loud turned out to be 2 very different things. The weeks that followed were the hardest of the whole ordeal, though nothing outwardly dramatic happened in them. I stopped sleeping through the night, waking at 3 and 4 with my heart going too fast for no reason I could name in the moment, though I knew the reason perfectly well by morning. I lost my appetite for almost 2 weeks, pushing food around plates at family dinners I now attended with a folder's worth of evidence sitting, unmentioned, in a locked drawer of my office desk. Maya asked me twice why I seemed distracted, and I told her work was busy, which was true, and also not the truth at all. My father, meanwhile, was unraveling in small ways only someone watching closely would have caught. He'd always been a man who filled silences before anyone else could. Now he let them sit a beat too long, his eyes flicking toward his phone. He'd always dressed with a kind of armored precision. I noticed, at a Sunday dinner, that his shirt was buttoned one hole wrong, and that he didn't seem to know it. Grant Pierce stopped coming to the hotel bar. When I asked, carefully, how the conference business was going, my father said, wrapped up, in a tone that closed the subject like a door slamming, though his hand, I noticed, had gone very still on the table, the way a hand goes still when its owner is concentrating hard on not letting it shake. I came close, once, to telling Sam everything, at his kitchen table with his youngest asleep upstairs and a beer sweating between his hands. I had the photographs pulled up on my phone. I had the sentence ready. And then he said, unprompted, Dad says the market's turning around, he thinks he can get the CD restructured favorably by spring, with such open, uncomplicated trust in his voice that I felt something in me lose its nerve. I put the phone face down on the table instead and asked about his kid's soccer schedule. I've thought about that moment more than almost any other in this story, the version of it where I said the thing, and the version where I didn't. In the version where I didn't, my father secured one more month, one more signature, one more small extension of a lie he was running out of road to keep telling. I paid for my silence in time I can't get back for Sam, and I knew it even as I chose it. I want to say the truth came out because I finally found my courage. It would be a better story that way. What actually happened is that my father's second bank called Sam's phone by mistake, looking for Walter, asking about a delinquent guarantee, and Sam, confused, frightened, holding a voicemail he didn't understand, called me instead of our father, because some instinct in him, even then, trusted me more. I told him everything that night. All of it. Harold's box, the 2 signatures, the amendment, the years of small dismissed details finally standing up straight and forming a sentence none of us could unhear. We told Renee 2 days later, at her insistence, once she'd noticed her own missing certificate of deposit and put half the pieces together herself before we finished the first sentence. She sat very still through all of it, and then she said something none of us expected, that she'd known, for almost a year, that Walter was hiding something about money, and had told herself it was a man's pride, not a man's fraud, because the alternative had been too large to hold. I let myself believe the smaller lie, she said, because the bigger one would have meant admitting I married someone I didn't actually know. Sam reached over and took her hand. It was the first time all evening any of us had touched each other. We arranged to meet my father at Renee's house the following Sunday. I brought the folder. Sam brought nothing but a face I'd never seen him wear before, not anger exactly, something closer to grief arriving early. My father walked into that living room already performing composure, the way he walked into every room of his life, choosing the armchair that put the window light behind him and us facing it. He expected an argument. He had, I think, already rehearsed several versions of one, the wounded patriarch version, the misunderstanding version, the you have no idea what I sacrificed version. I didn't give him an argument. I set the 2 documents on the coffee table between us, side by side, and slid them toward him without a word. He looked at them for a long moment. Long enough that Sam shifted in his seat, long enough that Renee's breath caught audibly. And then my father did something almost worse than denial. He nodded, once, slowly, and said, in a voice completely without heat, "Where did you get the original?" Harold kept a copy. Of course he did. A small, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I told your mother that man was too careful for his own good. You forged her signature. I amended a document that was already going to leave you 3 more than either of you had any idea how to manage responsibly at the time. His voice stayed level, almost gentle, the tone he used to use for explaining why a deal made sense. I moved capital I intended to grow and return. I was going to put it back before any of you ever needed to know it had moved. You used Sam's name for a personal debt guarantee, Dad. Sam's voice cracked slightly on Dad, the only sound in the room that wasn't controlled. My father looked at his son for a long moment, and something in his face did shift then, not remorse exactly, something closer to a man recalculating an equation that had just changed shape on him. He didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. He sat back in the chair and said, simply, "I did what I did," and let the silence after it stand, offering nothing further, no apology dressed up as one, no performance of grief for our benefit. It was, in its way, the most honest thing he'd said to any of us in years, and it was also, unmistakably, a door closing rather than opening. Renee didn't say a word through any of it. She sat with her hands folded, watching him with an expression I recognized, the specific stillness of someone deciding, in real time, exactly how much of her future she still wanted attached to this man. She looked at him and understood, fully, without any room left for doubt, that whatever she'd married 11 years ago had never entirely existed. She didn't cry either. She simply stood, walked to the front hall closet, and came back holding his overnight bag, which she set, gently, by the door. She didn't say leave. She didn't have to. I told him, that same evening, once Renee had gone quiet and Sam had gone out to the porch alone to breathe, that I would be filing a formal claim against the estate and reporting the forged document to the state bar and, if necessary, to law enforcement. I said it the way I say most difficult things to hotel guests who've done something unforgivable to my property, evenly, without theater, because I had learned, across 6 years of running a business full of other people's worst days, that certainty doesn't need volume. He didn't argue. He asked, quietly, whether there was a version of this that stayed private, and I told him there wasn't one I was interested in finding. The consequences arrived the way real consequences usually do, not in one dramatic collapse but in a series of smaller, permanent ones. The trust claim went through within 4 months, restoring my full share in Sam's, and reinstating the scholarship fund in my mother's name at nearly double its original value once interest and restitution were factored in. My father's development partnership with Grant Pierce dissolved within weeks of the bridge loan falling through, once Grant discovered, through channels of his own, exactly how compromised Walter's finances actually were. Renee filed for divorce 3 weeks after that Sunday and did not ask him for anything beyond what was legally hers, which struck me, when I heard it, as its own kind of quiet dignity. Sam struggled the longest with what to do with him. For a while he tried a careful, limited version of forgiveness, dinners with strict boundaries, no money discussed, ever, and I watched him try, and I understood why he needed to try, even as I chose, for myself, not to. My father moved into a condo half the size of the house he'd shared with Renee, and the last time I saw him, at a lawyer's office finalizing the estate settlement, he looked older than I'd ever seen him look, and smaller, in the specific way that men who've spent a lifetime performing size finally look once the performance stops being necessary to anyone but themselves. I still run the Ashford house. I still, occasionally, walk past Suite 412 and feel something tighten briefly in my chest before it passes. Maya knows a version of this story now, the version appropriate for a 12-year-old, and I've told her the one thing I actually want her to keep, that being the reasonable one, the calm one, the one who doesn't make waves, is not the same thing as being loved, or being safe, and that noticing something is wrong is not the same as choosing, every time, to look away from it. The most painful contradiction in this story was never really about money. It was that Walter Whitfield's cruelty and his competence had always been sold to his children as the same trait, that the man who called Claire ordinary was, underneath it, terrified of becoming ordinary himself, and had spent 40 years converting that fear into control over everyone in reach. His unmet need was never actually about the CD or the bridge loan, it was about a self-image built entirely on being the one who couldn't be diminished, and every dollar he moved was an attempt to outrun the possibility that he already had been. What this story reveals about Claire's arc is subtler than she found her courage, though that's the version that will sound cleanest in retrospect. The truer pattern is that competence had become her armor long before it became her career. She got extremely good at managing other people's crises precisely because managing her own family's dysfunction had trained her for nothing else. The forged signature wasn't the only forgery in this story. For years, Claire had also been quietly forging a version of peace that didn't actually exist, signing off on a family narrative, "Dad's just difficult, Dad just needs managing, this is just how we are," that required her own selective blindness to maintain. Harold's paused pen, Sam's too easy trust, the CD mentioned like a joke, these weren't hidden from her. They were visible and dismissible, which is a different, more insidious kind of hidden. The accumulation matters more than any single lie. It was never one betrayal, it was years of small, survivable seeming compromises that Claire, Sam, and even Renee each made separately, none of them realizing the others were making parallel ones, until the structure finally had nowhere left to hide its cracks. That is, perhaps, the story's real subject, not a villain and his victims, but an entire family system quietly organized around not asking a question everyone half suspected the answer to. It leaves a harder question underneath the satisfying one of, did justice arrive? It did. But justice arriving doesn't undo the years spent not looking. It only changes what happens next. I think about Harold's pen a lot, that half-second pause, 8 years before anything else happened, when someone who barely knew me noticed something I chose not to. I've asked myself since whether he saw it because he was paying closer attention than I was to my own life, and I think the honest answer is yes. Sometimes the people closest to a lie are the last ones equipped to see it clearly, because seeing it costs them something the outsider doesn't have to pay. What hurt most, in the end, wasn't the money. It was realizing how many years I spent mistaking my father's approval for something worth protecting, when it had never once been offered without a price attached. If there's a person who told you, in some quiet or loud way, that you'd never amount to anything, I'd love to know, in one word in the comments, who that was for you, or the moment you first let yourself stop believing them. Thank you for sitting with this one all the way to the end. It meant something to finally say it out loud.